In the video you're about to watch, I'm using the term narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is just a fancy way of saying attention, both negative and positive. The narcissist solicits input and feedback from other people. And then the narcissist uses this feedback, this input, this attention, uses them in order to regulate his or her internal environment, to regulate moods, affects, especially negative affects, negative emotions such as anger or envy or hatred, and in order to self-enhance. Narcissistic supply helps the narcissist to maintain a grandiose, fantastic, inflated, counterfactual, unrealistic self-concept. Self-concept, which is comprised of self-image, self-esteem, self-confidence, a sense of self-worth. Narcissistic supply, therefore, is a critical regulatory function. The narcissist uses narcissistic supply to maintain a stable, fixed, immutable, unchanging internal environment. That is very important to understand. Narcissistic supply is not a motivating force. It does not cause the narcissist to behave in any specific way. It doesn't induce the narcissist to action. It doesn't motivate the narcissist to move on. On the very contrary, narcissistic supply is about maintaining the status quo ante, about maintaining the self-concept in a completely frozen state, invulnerable, impermeable, unchangeable, unmodifiable. Narcissistic supply is therefore a stabilizing influence, an integral part of what we call self-enhancement. Enjoy the video. In the late 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, when you were all just a glimmer in your parents' eyes, I was toying with the phrase narcissistic fuel. I was coming up with a whole new language to describe the internal world of the narcissist and the way the narcissist interacts with other people, now known as narcissistic abuse, a phrase which I also coined. So I was coming up with all kinds of neologisms and coinages and new phrases and new words, and for a while I was using narcissistic fuel. And then I decided that it's wrong. Narcissistic fuel is seriously wrong, very misleading. I'll explain in a minute why. I went back to the psychoanalytic literature of the 1930s and I found another phrase, narcissistic supplies, not supply, supplies in plural. In the early literature of psychoanalysis, narcissistic supplies simply meant the way the child interacts with his or her parents during the narcissistic phase of ego development. It had nothing to do with pathological narcissism. So I borrowed this phrase, narcissistic supply. I changed supplies in plural. I changed it, I transformed it into narcissistic supply. I linked it to pathological narcissism, and I infused it with new meaning. The way narcissistic supply is used nowadays is 100% my work. But in the process, I have devalued and discarded, normally, the phrase narcissistic fuel. Why did I give up on it? Because I think it's exceedingly misleading. What do we do with fuel? When we put fuel in the car, it's because we want it to do some work. Fuel is intimately connected with motion, with movement, with action, with labor, with work. When we put fuel rods in a nuclear reactor, it's because we want to bring about a nuclear chain reaction, which would lead essentially and ultimately to the production of energy. Similarly, when we put fuel in a car, we want it to move forward. When we eat, food is a form of fuel, and we eat in order to be able to make YouTube videos, for example. Fuel, therefore, is intimately, irretrievably, irreversibly, ineluctably, absolutely, 100% ultimately, completely connected to work. Whereas narcissistic supply is completely the opposite. Narcissistic supply, the input and feedback that the narcissist solicits from other people, it has nothing to do with motion, action, work, labor, change, or transformation. Exactly the opposite. Narcissistic supply is about self-enhancement. It's about preserving the grandiose, inflated, fantastic self-concept of the narcissist. It's about not making any changes. It's about convincing the narcissist that he doesn't need to change. He doesn't need to do any work because he is perfect. So, you see, narcissistic fuel is completely wrong because it gives the impression that the narcissist is on some mission, some quest, some enormous labor, Herculean labor, some toil, and he needs fuel all the time to maintain this endeavor, this effort, this enterprise, this project. That's not the case at all. It's actually the exact opposite of what's happening. The narcissist consumes and absorbs input and feedback from other people in order to be able to not change, to not do any work, to not move on. It's exactly the opposite of fuel. Okay, but this is only one example of several phrases and words and so on and so forth, which are very common online, inevitably, and are very misleading. Consider, for example, narcissist magnet. Yes, I'm ashamed to admit that I coined this one as well. Narcissist magnet is, again, evokes a very misleading imagery, because a magnet is passive. A magnet is just there. A magnet is not responsible, not accountable for its own magnetism. A magnet, therefore, is the hapless recipient, and in many ways victim, of external, outside forces, the force known as magnetism. So when you say I'm a narcissist magnet, it means I've been victimized by a narcissist, I teamed up with a narcissist, I married a narcissist, I had children with a narcissist, I collaborated with a narcissist, but none of this is my fault. I'm not responsible for any of this. I should not be held accountable. I've had no contribution to any of this. I was the absolutely 100% passive recipient of the narcissist's attentions and the narcissist's deleterious actions. None of it has anything to do with me. I'm a magnet, which of course is counterfactual. That's not the way it happened. Victims contribute to the predicament. Victims are responsible, should be held accountable for some of their decisions and choices. There's no excuse for abuse. Narcissistic abuse is an egregious form of maltreatment, and of course should be penalized one way or another. But the victim is there. The victim has agency. The victim has made choices and decisions. The victim got involved. So the victim is not a magnet. And it's very misleading to describe victims as narcissist magnets, because they helplessly attract narcissists to them and then just stand back and allow the narcissist to destroy their lives and take away their identities. That's very exculpating, it's very aggrandizing, but it's not the truth. Consider another simile. The vampire. Everyone and his dog, self-styled experts of course, would tell you that narcissists are vampiric, that they are vampires. But if you delve into the 19th century literature about vampires, and the 20th century, and the 21st century, cinema for example, vampires love. They're capable of experiencing attraction, sexual, romantic. They're capable of falling in love. Some vampires are actually altruistic. They want to save people. They want to give people an eternal life. Of course, they harm people, they hurt people, they kill people before they revive them. It's all very true. But many, many vampires in literature and cinema actually are doing all this because they believe that to be a vampire is far preferable and far superior to being a human. So they're trying to convert humans into vampires, thereby improving their eternal lives later on. So that's not exactly a narcissist. A narcissist is incapable of experiencing love. Narcissists have no access to positive emotions, not in themselves, and they're unable to recognize positive emotions in others. Narcissists are not altruistic. They're not concerned with the welfare, well-being, and happiness of other people, even when they claim to be so, when they claim to be charitable and altruistic. They do it ostentatiously as a way to obtain narcissistic supply. Pro-social narcissists, communal narcissists, are absolutely the worst type of narcissist, in my view, because you don't see them coming. And so narcissists are not vampires. The motivations of vampires are, in most cases, pure. Their methods leave a lot to be desired, but they experience desire, they experience passion, experience love, they experience attraction, and they want to better, they want to improve, they want to transform and transmute people into a life form which they perceive to be far better, far preferable, far superior to the human condition. Now, that is not to say that all similes and metaphors are wrong. Take, for example, Rosemberg's self-love deficit, which I think is a wonderful coinage. Or consider, for example, Thurstin's black hole, when she described the black hole in autistic children. Today we use black hole to describe what's happening inside the borderline, inside the narcissist, this all-consuming emptiness within them. So some metaphors capture reality, capture the essence and quiddity of mental illness, and convey them in a way that is much more easily communicable and much more recognizable to laymen and to normal and healthy people. But some similes and metaphors are very misleading. They teach us the wrong things. Narcissistic fuel, narcissist magnet, narcissists as vampires are just 3 examples, unfortunately, of many.